Hello, and welcome to Resilience Radio. I'm Irvin Eisenberg, host of the show. As always, the opinions on this show are not meant to be medically diagnostic or prescriptive in any way, and are not necessarily my opinions or that of Resilience. I'm going to jump in with the second episode with Keegan Albaugh. You can check out last episode if you want some context. There's a statement you said earlier on about some pushback from the idea of the lonely man. Men can actually have support and be vulnerable and explore aspects of themselves.
Oh, for sure. And that's, when I think about even our kids who are, when they attend daycare or preschool, those are spaces where 99% of the teachers are female identifying individuals. And it speaks to that, you're talking about as, who are you watching take care of babies and what are you getting notes from? And, I think about kids who, if they spend a lot, they're going to school from age 12 weeks through, 5 years, those early ed years. And if they're just seeing no men and just all women who are the ones who are taking care of the kids, changing the diapers, feeding them, doing everything, it's what impact does that have on kids and the long-term look on that, what they have as whose job it is to raise children. And so that's another big part of the work that we're doing. Is just because you were talking earlier about, when you pushing a stroller and you get praise in the community, our early Dad Guild events, I remember three, it was the critical mass. As soon as you had 3 dads with kids out in the community, people would stop in their tracks and be like, what's going on? And you're and at first you're oh, it's kind of funny. But then by the 10th time on a walk, you're just shut up. This is, we're just hanging out with our kids. This isn't a spectacle.
I don't think I've ever done that. So that sounds refreshing to me, but I could almost see myself being one of the people to stop and be yeah.
Yeah, and it's at first when the first person says it, you're yeah, this is great. But then once the 10th person says it in an hour, you're okay, I'm just walking with my friends and my kid and their kids. But I think it speaks and it makes sense that when you think about how many people as children they were raised and who is doing pretty much all, every family's been different, but speaking as our society, who spends most of the time with the kids. And you think about it not just in the home, but in school environments, on television, what are they seeing? It's of course that then when they see a bunch of dads, they're oh my gosh, this is not the norm. My brain isn't computing this. So of course I'm going to make a comment. And so how do we build towards a world where that comment isn't going to be made? And I think about my own kids who, my daughters are 9 and 7, and their entire lives, they've just been going to Dad Guild things, and not just going to Dad Guild events, but also me saying hey, I'm going to go hang out with the dads and spend time together. And now they're older, we talk a bit more about the reasoning behind it. And I get so curious of man, when you girls are in your 20s and 30s, how is your perspective on parenthood going to be different from kids who maybe didn't have that similar experience growing up? And I'm excited for that research to take place one day. But I'm just wow, you kids have been raised seeing just really active dads in the community, and not just me, but because I think sometimes people say that they're oh, my dad was great, and it's that's awesome. And how powerful is it to for your kid to see a bunch of dads all doing it? So it's not just oh yeah, well my dad was the unicorn, where it can actually be oh yeah, no, there were a bunch of, I guess I wouldn't call it, if there's a bunch of them, they're not unicorns, they're they're elk or something now. I don't know.
Well, it just becomes part of the norm, and then you can build from there. You can start critiquing. If you have one example of something, then I think I used to joke before having kids that we're all going to mess up kids. It's less of a joke now. We're all going to mess up our kids in our own unique way. And at the time, I was the nuclear family is problematic because you only got 2 people, and you've only got 2 examples to go by. So if you only have one father figure, that you see interacting, you have one example, and there's going to
Mhm.
be great things about that, but there's going to be challenging things or things that don't apply to other circumstances. So having a wider lens of what's available, what does being a father mean? Yeah, it's the flip side of being a man around children, as I'm sure the conversations have come up, and this is not new to you, but because of fear of abuse, fear of sexual inappropriate behavior, it's not always easy or as direct to be able to interact with children, especially ones that aren't your own, but even ones that are your own in our society. I worked in a daycare center where when you try to get the kids down for a nap, which often because of the weird ways that things are set up, you don't get to go on your lunch break until the kids are asleep, and you can go down to one person. Some weird dynamics of that, which can get into gender, caregiver, labor law conversation. But regardless, people rub the backs of the kids to get them to sleep. Someone comes into a room and sees me rubbing the back of a kid, and I would do it. I'm a massage therapist at the time. I'm an OT now. Um, People would look at me like I was being inappropriate. I'm like, everyone is rubbing kids' backs, but me down on the floor rubbing a kid's back is something else. I am a physical person. I believe in wrestling and roughhousing and giving massages and hugs. And in a preschool and after school setting, I realized that I was unwilling to not give kids hugs, and it was going to get me in trouble. And I actually left working in childcare. I could say I left for that. I was eventually going to probably salary wise not want to continue to work there, which gets into gender dynamics again. But I left in that moment because I saw the writing on the wall and realized I was going to get myself in trouble. I wasn't going to do anything wrong within outside of my own morality or legality or hopefully anyone else's morality, but that things were not fair for me in that way. Waiting in line at the DMV, and a little girl says hi and slightly oddly flirtatious in her way of saying this is 3-year-old. And I hesitate before smiling. And I'm glad I hesitated because her mother grabbed her daughter and pulled her away from me. I'm like, your daughter said hi to me. There was nothing, I didn't do anything. And if I see a child injured, I look around to see who's there before just scooping in to rescue the child, right? That's sort of where our society is at with stuff. So if I have my child with me, it gives me more of a license. Suddenly I get to be a dad to other people. I become a
Mhm.
trusted, safer figure. So I've definitely leaned on the I'm an OT
Yeah.
in certain settings to be able to interact with children differently because I'm a professional, even though I don't do much pediatrics, I do some and
Mhm.
I like working with kids. So it's just interesting, like if we want men to be able to step into these roles, there are actually obstacles to that. And I want to point out the reality that yes, sexual abuse happens, but
Mhm.
it's rarely the male childcare provider,
Mhm.
statistically speaking. It's usually the trusted uncle or the
Mhm.
trusted grandparent, right? It's terrible to think about, and but it's the reality is it's not the person who chose to do this for their profession and have their background checks, and yet
Yeah.
it's suspect. Really what it came down to was there was two men in an after school program. And that what we and because I might hug a kid goodbye when they seem to want to hug, or I might wrestle with them a little bit, which is questionable whether it's appropriate at all. The fact that there was two men in the after school program made them decide to move me to another room in another program, and I thought that was I left that day. I decided not to return the following day because I just said I meant this isn't okay to me, and that speaks to like it's okay if there's a man as long as there's women supervising. It's like, why can't
Mhm.
there be a group of men walking down the street with children and it not be either nefarious or, whoa, let's applaud you for just being a parent?
Yeah. Well, and I think that, because, in my experience with Dad Guild over the years, especially early on, and rightfully so, I think there was mistrust. Like people would question, um, oh, like who are these guys? Like what are they doing? Are they trying, something's off here. I see a bunch of guys trying to like act woke and they're trying to go out together and now they want to do stuff with the kids. And this is just so different from what we're used to. And then when I've talked to people, particularly people who have experienced harm or have been assaulted by the hands of a man. And again, rightfully so. There's a lot of mistrust with men, where it's just like, hey, even though I think what you're doing is great, like I want nothing to do with you, and I can't even talk about like the work that you do. And it's like, yeah, that makes sense. It's just so triggering. And we live in a society where like men have caused a lot of harm. And you know, like even when you say like, hey, statistically speaking, it's not going to be the male child care provider who is assaulting your child. It's more likely the uncle or the cousin, or someone pretty close.
Boyfriend of the child care provider.
Yeah, but I think, people have these stereotypes and they have these ideas, and that like, and I think too, because we live in a world where like it's very uncommon to see like a male childcare provider. And so I think it raises for a lot of folks, especially folks who have experienced harm, it increases discomfort. And especially when it's your kid and you're like, you start picturing worst case scenarios. And then I think, and then I think one of the challenges too is that when men are, like, what you went through and experienced, like that's awful. That's awful. Like you should be able to be a loving, nurturing male childcare provider and not feel like people are coming in and like questioning your motives and acting like you're sketchy. It's like that's not fun. Like you're doing your job and you're good at it. But then what happens is if when we don't make spaces for men to like, hey, gosh, I need to talk about this with other men because I just want to connect about this topic. There aren't really spaces to go do that. And so I think what we find is that when men and boys feel rejected, or when they feel hurt, or when they're leaning, they're, and like you said, how there isn't like a clear rite of passage for men, and where are they going to make sense of what they're going through. And in this day and age, like a lot of it is going on the internet and finding what communities speak to you there. And unfortunately, and I think this also kind of like fuels some of the distrust with men, is like the men's rights movements that are going on right now. And like, guys like Andrew Tate, who, I listened to him, and like for the first half, I'm like, man, this guy's right. Like men are struggling, they're having a hard time. Like, man, he's right. But then like the message turns to like, and we got to take it back, and like this is unfair, and like men are the best and women are inferior. And you're like, whoa, no, you took a hard turn there. But unfortunately, if kids are already like, wow, this guy sees me, he's speaking to me, they're going to follow that road along with him. When instead it's, gosh, like, yeah, this is complex and men are hurting and they're confused. And how do we create spaces for them to make sense of what they're going through? And how do we make that a norm? One of the things that when you're like with a male child care provider, where it's like, hey, if someone walks in and there's one male child care provider and there's 30 women, it makes sense that people are gonna like be like, oh, that guy's different, and some might question like, what's this person doing here? Same as like when a dad walks into a play group that, if there's 20 moms there, most of the moms will be like, hey, this is great, this guy's here. And then there might be a few who are like, what's this guy doing here? What's his deal? Or express some kind of like, even if it doesn't come out outwardly, some like
Mhm.
internal discomfort. But if we have a world where, if it's 50-50, or, it doesn't have to be 50-50, but you see more representation, I would believe that the suspicions and like fearing that something awful is going to happen, that's going to decrease substantially. When I think about the very first Dad Guild, this is even before Dad Guild. This is like what inspired me to launch Dad Guild. Is I ran a group for new dads at a yoga studio. And the very first group, I was like, all right, why are you all here? And pretty much every single person was like, because my wife made me. My wife made me come here. And I was like, uh-oh, this is gonna be tough. But then we met once a month for 9 months. And then by month 9, everyone was like, this was great. It was something I didn't know that I needed. How do we keep this going? And so that was the like, aha, okay. And what I've noticed now is that we've gone from, begging, trying to get people to like come out to things and their partners pushing them to now when I run groups for new dads, when I ask that same question, like, why, what are you here? The responses are like, I've been excited to join Dad Guild for the past 2 years before we even had a kid. And this is just so awesome. And it's like, oh man, we've gone from like, you have to pull teeth to get dads in here to like, it sounds like men are like wanting to have kids so they can be in Dad Guild. And like, that's in a matter of like 7 years, like, that's such a like, and so no longer is it like, oh, you should go to Dad Guild. It becomes the expectation, which I think is critically important.
So this begs the question that the group that I was considering starting would be men hanging out who could have children. Now the question is, if a dad, somebody who is not a dad, wants to interact with kids and be part of Dad Guild in some way, is there an avenue for men to hang out without the children as the sort of admission to be in that group?
So sorry. So the question is: are these folks, are they dads or they're not dads?
Can someone who's not a dad have a place in Dad Guild?
Um, you know, I always encourage folks, like, if they're interested in like fathering topics, to reach out and to connect, to like talk about how, what spaces that might make sense with. That being said, like, I've noticed being like, oh, Dad Guild's so awesome, but I don't have kids, and so
Mhm.
I don't have a space, and so that continues to sit in my mind around like, our focus is really dads, and as much as I want to expand the focus to include, all men, that would we would just start stretching ourselves pretty thin, and so
I could
some
see
of the
that.
yeah, but some of the work that we're doing there is working with like community partners who are working with boys and men around like, how can we work together to making sure there is something for everyone? Or, I always encourage folks too, if they're like, hey, I want to get something up and running, but just for men, it's like, hey, I'm happy to meet with you and talk.
Mm.
And, we have a space and we have resources. Like, I'm happy to share and support. But it just like, it's not going to be us carrying the torch. It just has to
Yeah.
come from
No.
someone else.
Yeah, and it wasn't meant to be a challenge of you that you should be offering this, but it makes me think about there's this cultural assumption that men, unless they are a dad, shouldn't really be interacting with children, right? So there's
Yeah. Yeah.
I used to hand I used to take my child and like to go, oh, here, you want to hold the kid, and intentionally hand the baby over to a man in the group who wasn't a grandpa or someone who was more of an uncle or a friend. Just, I mean, it was interesting for my own amusement to see how they hold this child because they hadn't been given that opportunity before. And most people are not given an opportunity to hold an infant until it's like most men are not given an opportunity to hold an infant until it's theirs or like their niece or nephew. That there isn't babies don't get passed off to men very much.
Oh no. And that's why when we talk like our Welcome to Fatherhood group, and it's okay, like, who's changed a diaper, who's held the baby, and it's like the norm is people have never held a baby, they've never changed a diaper, they've never done any of those things. And which is funny because sometimes in a group people are like, not in those groups, but like when you have women present or you have uh just general community members, it is kind of like, ah, yeah, men, like, of course you didn't, like, why, how have you never handled a baby? And you're like, well, what, who was allowing me as a teenage boy to babysit? Like, I mean, one, I wasn't that interested. Two, like, can't, no one was doing that. No one's like handing, teenage boys their babies when I was growing up. Or at least that just like wasn't the norm. So it's like, yeah, unless you had a younger sibling, then like much younger, then like, yeah, that wasn't a norm for you.
Yeah. So, is there anything else that you would like to share about Dad Group or thoughts about fatherhood or anything else before we finish up?
I think, I mean, what I just encourage folks who are listening that, like, because I think sometimes people hear about Dad Guild and the response is, uh, are you still, sorry, I pressed the button. Um,
No, no worries.
yeah. Um, I encourage people who are listening that sometimes folks hear about Dad Guild and they're like, I'm not a dad. This isn't for me. They just kind of like shut it out. And I encourage folks to consider, as we talked about earlier, all the ways that engaging men as nurturers, all the ways that can impact society. And I'm a firm believer, when I was talking I have a DEI coach who I meet with monthly. And I remember like early on in our work, he said, there's no greater threat to the patriarchy than men taking care of babies. And that has really stuck with me and been like a guiding principle in our work around like, what is at the core here. And it's like, well, yeah, if we can make the norm men taking care of babies, like that dismantles patriarchy. And so I think for people to really consider the depth of this work, and then I think too, if you're listening, to like talk about this with someone that because the other piece that comes up is that what we're doing here in Vermont is really unique. I have yet to come across like another group or organization in the country that's approaching the work in the same way that we are and is having this level of success. And we've also, so recently we coached, or we supported a group in Pennsylvania to get a dad group up and running. And now they're starting things up. We recently have been supporting a father living in a refugee settlement in Uganda, getting a group for dads up and going. And now he's like sending pictures, and there's like 12 dads sitting around talking about being a man. And I think it's such important work. And I think that when you share it with other people and let them know, it can spread very quickly. And I think that when I think about a future of like, gosh, what if there were like thousands of these types of communities for men and for fathers spread out across the country or the globe, like what impact does that have? And that's picturing what that impact could look like. That's the hope that I hold on to in this day and age with all the things going on in the world. So I just invite people to step into that space and envision what that could look like, and then think about, gosh, like how can I get involved, or how can I support this, or how can I tell someone about what these folks are doing? Because it is really powerful.
Thank you so much for coming on today. I'm looking forward to checking more into it myself, and thank you for doing the good work that you do.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Irvin. I loved it.
You've been listening to Resilience Radio. I'm Irvin Eisenberg, host of the show. We were just talking about Dad Guild and fatherhood groups and such. The music was brought to you by Aaron Marcus with their tune Some Biological Process. If you enjoyed this episode, stay tuned. We'll keep having different topics, health related, community related, resilience related. Until next time, take care.